problem.
Yeah, that's fine.
Don't use paper now.
Okay.
Don't worry, that.
Okay. Just
The other thing is, when Max says, he'll say, I think that's a good idea. How do we deal with this, Mo? And then I'll tell you.
Yeah, okay.
Is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine.
That'll be
That'll be
easier.
better. Yeah. Okay. If you look, you're all in your seats. Thank you. I'd like to welcome. I'd like to welcome today to the meeting of Environment and Transport Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live via the County Council website and will also be available for viewing after the meeting. Can anyone please switch up their microphone on when speaking and turn it off when they're finished speaking, please? I've received apologies from Mr. Pearson and Mr. Coxon will be substituting for him. Just one other item. I've been asked by members, and myself as well, to wish Ozzy O'Shea a happy birthday, and I'd like to ask Ozzy, will you be buying the drinks later tonight?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, happy birthday. So we now go to item 1, minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of November 2019, which is page 5 to 14. So do I have a seconder? Second. Thank you. All in favour? Move it then, thank you. We now come to item 2, question time. We've received 3 sets of questions from members of the public, and everyone should have a copy of the questions and answers included in page 3 to 10 of the supplementary pack, which have also been provided to each questioner. So these can be taken as read. I would like to remind members that no discussion is to be held on these. The first set received from Stephen Rice regarding traffic and road issues in the parish of Huddlescote and Donington-le-Heath. Stephen, thank you. Stephen, would you like to ask any supplementary questions? You
yes.
can ask up to 7, as there were 7 implements of your original questions. But I would like to remind you that your supplementary question should be to clarify the reply you have been given, and you should not raise any new issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Firstly, thank you for everybody. First time I've ever been involved in something of this nature. Pertaining to question 1, I apologise, but I do feel there's been a misinterpretation of the question in the sense that Dennis Street, what we were attempting to do was not to close a junction, but to narrow a junction where there is 2 entrances to the same road. So my question would be, please can we close part of the junction at the top end of Grange Road with Dennis Street, which still allows access to the residents and the vehicles that you raised into the street. The effect of closing this road will be to stop HGVs coming down, and also perhaps 1 or 2 of the rat run people that are using the very oldest street in Leicestershire to avoid traffic lights at Ashburton Road.
Annie, would you like to?
Thank you for that
Thank
clarification.
You.
I will take that back to officers, if I may, and ask them to look at that again. I'm still slightly concerned because, obviously, as you'll see from the answer, we are concerned that in doing some kind of closure there, that we're putting more traffic onto that Hugglesgate crossroads, and that's something we'd want to avoid doing. However, given your clarification there, I'll ask them to look at it one more time, and we can come back to you on that one, if I may.
Are there any further questions?
Yes, I'm afraid so. Question 2, the council has recommended a review, or a potential they would need a review. So I'm asking, will the council recommend this review, and if so, when?
There aren't any significant changes in the recent past that have happened that have actually would trigger a review and merit a review of the HGV limits in that area. It wasn't previously in conjunction with the 511 going in, which obviously changed significantly transport and traffic movements within the Colville and Hugglescote area because you had that facility. However, we don't feel that there's anything significant happening since then that would trigger a wholesale review of the weight limits in that area, and therefore it's not a priority for the limited resources we have at this time. If something does change that, yes, we would look at reviewing the weight restrictions.
What would change that?
Significantly, either different traffic movements because a new piece of highway goes in, etc., and it'd be inappropriate to, we wouldn't need to have through traffic to the same extent because there was another mechanism for that, so we'd want to restrict them going in. Something of that kind of nature would trigger a review.
So the 3,500 homes being built would be a significant change to the traffic conditions.
What those homes would do in getting planning permission is they are required, the developer is required to have a transport assessment. That transport assessment looks at the impact the traffic from a new development would have on the road network and therefore identifies measures that would need to be put in place to mitigate that. So we'd expect that to come forward through any planning permission and the work that goes behind that in order to gain a planning consent.
And has that been done?
Every development that's actually on site has a planning consent. It has to and has got conditions with it.
No, I was just noting that there were 4 questions. It's turning into a debate rather than a supplementary question and answer session.
My apologies.
So, Mr. Ross, can you just
Indeed.
supplementary question?
Indeed. Question 5. What is the objection to actually changing a traffic light sequence which will ultimately improve safety and traffic flow?
We have looked at that junction extensively a few years ago, and there wasn't any options that were put forward at that time. There wasn't sufficient support for them to go forward. There is, again, no means or no need, in our view, in terms of the local transport scenario that would need an alteration, require an alteration there. I will, however, mention to the traffic signal officers that can they check that they are happy that that junction is functioning at its best timing scenario and timing patterns on that. But there's no wholesale review of the operation of that junction. It would be purely looking at the timing of the signals.
Thank you. Any further supplementary questions, Mr. Rice?
As regards to question 7, excuse me one moment. Is it possible for a speed monitoring camera to be placed on Grange Road? In modern day systems, that technology is being implemented in lots of places, and I suggest that it is needed down Grange Road.
Okay, thank you.
We have many requests for speed cameras and locations, and we do have an extensive list of those, so we'll certainly ask that this location is added to that list.
Thank you. Any more further supplementary questions, Mr. Rice?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephen, for attending this meeting today, and you are welcome to stay for the reminder of the meeting, or you can leave. It's entirely up to yourself.
Thank you.
The second set of questions have been received from Kyra Williams regarding the Send Transport. Kyra, would you like to ask any supplementary questions? Again, I must ask that your supplementary questions should be a clarity to the reply that you have given, and you should not raise any further questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for letting me speak today. Yeah, just a few, just three if that's possible. With regard the first point that was made, saying considerable work was needed to assess the costs of the council making home to school transport for pupils fully funded. Can I just clarify what work was done for this? Was documents made to give all those figures to make it fully funded? And it says it was not completed. So when you say this is not completed, when will this completed? Have you got a date for completion, or are there plans to give a completion date? So that's my first query, that it seems a bit vague in terms of outcomes.
And would you like to answer that, Anne?
We will look to have the full evidence with our submission going in. We will be having conversations with the MPs, and you'll appreciate the county has some new MPs to, one, make them familiar with the situation if they're not, and two, to put the case forward, and also, with a wider campaign that hopefully we would seek to have other transport authorities support that with the LGA, the Local Government Association, and we'll look to have that full evidence here for our particular instance. But again, we would want to encourage, our comparator authorities to give similar evidence for theirs, because this is something that doesn't just affect Leicestershire, obviously, it's a national thing. So we'd look to have that full evidence at that time. We're beginning to engage with the MPs, they're now in place, they're establishing themselves, and we'll have those full discussions with them to hopefully raise this issue to try and get some action and traction with government.
That's fantastic, thanks. That kind of does answer my second question, so you might have to skip that, because my second question was, you've agreed to raise the issue with the newly elected Leicestershire MPs and LGA. My question really was, are these meetings planned? Is there something planned in progress to get this started, or is it just something that you've got a mind to do? Just wanted to know, what actions have been taken to make these meetings with MPs to discuss fairer funding.
There isn't dates in the diary at the moment. We're, bear in mind, some are entirely new to the county, so they're getting established. But we will be looking to do that in the next month or two, I would say.
That's brilliant. Thank you. I just have one more question, and it's very brief. Question number 4, as it stands, you say, as it stands, environmental congestion impacts are not factors when you consider assessing the request for post-16 home to school transport. And you have said, in light of Council's climate change commitment, you will consider and review how best to mitigate environmental impacts on school transport. I'm just wondering whether, when you reinstigate home to school transport for post-16 in 2020, whether or not that may be a part of your policy when you consider requests from parents that you might think of congestion outside schools and the issues by lots of parents. May that be a part of your policy, or is that something that you can't clarify at this point?
I think, to be honest, in terms of the timing, because you'll appreciate even now, or perhaps you don't, sorry, even now that it's February, we have to start planning for the new academic year to get the transport in place and the appropriate arrangements there for come September. The environment strategy is under review, and that will go on throughout this year with various the reports will come both to the Scrutiny Committee as well as to Cabinet and eventually to Fuel Council during this year, so there's full and frank discussion and influence on that. So unfortunately, I don't think the timing is going to be right for us to have fully considered the implications of a revised environment strategy with our climate change commitment to then flow through into hard, clear clarity in what a policy should look like going forward. So if I'm absolutely frank, I don't think we'll have clarity for this year's planning for the school transport because of that timing dilemma. But yes, it's something we'll have to consider fully for the following year in terms of what should flow through to that policy.
Maybe it's something that, once you've got the policy going and implemented, you can review and see how it works with environmental, requirements of the authority as and when in the future. Fair enough. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Blake.
Yes, just to supplement part of the answer with regards to meeting with MPs, as you'll appreciate, there was a motion at full council. The leader, I understand, will be undertaking meetings with the MPs on the 31st of January, and I'm sure this will be on the agenda, but through the leader's office, as opposed to something that comes through the ENT department.
That's brilliant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Payne, and thank you very much. You can stay for the rest of the meeting if you so wish to, or you can leave when you want to. Thank you. The third set are from Hinckley and Bosworth Borough Councillor Andrew Furlong regarding proposals for a waste transfer unit at Barton. I do believe that Mr Furlong is not here. Is that correct? Unfortunately then, is not able to be at the meeting today, so these questions will be circulated to him following the meeting. Thank you. We now come to item 3, questions asked by members under standing orders, which we have received questions from Dr Anion and Mr Hunt under standing order 7.3 and 7.5. Everyone should have a copy of the questions and answers included under pages 11 to 14 of the supplementary pack. So these can be taken as read, and I would like to remind members that no discussion is to be held on the questions. Firstly, Dr Anion had submitted questions regarding peat usage in Leicestershire, and Dr Anion, would you like to say any supplementary questions to clarify the reply you have been given and to remind you that you should not raise any new issues? Welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Chair. No, I'm very happy with the response. I just wanted to, the last section where it says that we're going to be promoting the wider phasing out of this, can I have some detail on how we might go about that?
Apologies, Chair. Yes, I think we mentioned in the response the information that government through RAP are putting together, and some of my service areas historically have done more promotion around some of the waste elements. We are looking to expand more fully our approach to offering advice and information and links to some of that information nationally. So some of my teams will be making sure that the web content is linking to national or recognised centres of excellence on some of this information.
The second set are from Mr Hunt on active travel. Mr Hunt, would you like a supplementary question?
I've no supplementary. I just asked the question to help Councillor Payne next time he's asked about active travel. So I'm very pleased with the answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Hunt. Now we come to item 4 on the agenda, to advise any other items that the Chairman has decided to take as urgent elsewhere on the agenda, and I have not been advised of any urgent questions. Item 5, declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. Does any member have any interest they wish to declare?
Can I declare a personal interest in item 8, the medium-term financial strategy? The usual one is non-pecuniary. It's to do with the taxes and the passenger transportation agenda. Thanks.
You should have before you paper setting out how we propose to deal with this. It is divided into sections to assist the debate. So can I ask the lead member and director to comment on each section and then invite questions? So service transformation and budget transfers. So who's taking that first, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. The purpose of this report is to present to the committee our draft MTFS covering the next 4-year period for the department and how it impacts the department, in order that the committee can give any recommendations, comments, and feed those through to the Scrutiny Commission, which is happening on the 27th of this month, and then that report going forward to Cabinet on the 7th of February. So it really is an opportunity to comment on the department's proposals given our funding situation, which is clearly set out here, and I will now take you through that if that's all right. I propose just to cover the first 2 sections now and then stop for questions if that's all right, Chair. As you're more than aware, the department, along with the rest of the council, has been going through transformation for a good number of years now, and overall we have made savings of 42 million across the department since 2010-11. This continues, as you will see in the report. In terms of the revenue budget for the next 4-year period, you will see that the upcoming financial year we have a figure of just over 80 million across the department. That is a net figure. Overall we have 124 million expenditure, but we do have either grants or income from various sources, and again that's detailed later in the report, of 43 million, so it gives us a net position of 80 million. Slightly less going forward in future years, and the reason for that will come evident with some of the growth items we'll discuss, but 77 million over the next, the following 3 years for the department. Table 2 there sets out across each of our key service areas. Now I do appreciate that, it's not immediately transparent exactly what services sit under those. I'm happy to take questions on that, but it does give you, just that breakup of that 80 million for the next financial year. In terms of budget transfers and adjustments, there are some kind of fairly, I would say, standard things. For instance, pay inflation, and particularly for our department, inflation on some of our types of services. We don't know what that is at the moment, but a contingency is made in the central pot, because we know every year we will have that inflation, and that is then transferred to the budget from that central pot. I think that's all I want to say there as a very high-level introduction to the revenue situation. If anybody has any questions.
Have any questions? No?
Well, if there aren't any questions, I'll just say it's actually quite nice to come to a budget scrutiny meeting of the department and recognise that there's some, if you like, extra resources being made available for this coming year. Overall, there's £9.9 million worth of extra growth within the revenue, but that still doesn't mean we can't make the savings. We have to make the savings, and they're being identified as well. Particular pressure, as we already know, is on the SEN transport budgets. This year we're already overspending by about £1.7 million on SEN, so clearly moving forward we need to look at that very closely and see what level of resource we need to support that. We've spoken at length about the maintenance budgets, and we've spoken about the deterioration, the long-term deterioration of the Leicestershire road network, and that's something that we're very keen to slow down, so we've allocated another £3.5 million towards that maintenance budget. But of course, much is dependent on in-year bids to government, which open up from time to time, which is a frustration for myself personally, because I know how much work and effort and resource goes into putting those bids together. But the system is the system, and we're supporting those particular budgets with an extra £3.5 million this year. There are another £3.7 million in relation to other highways initiatives and improvement schemes that's been allocated. And we're well aware of some of the major capital schemes. We've spoken at length about the Melton Distributor Road, and we've obviously got the Zotch Bridge, and we've got the Barden redevelopment for the waste transfer site there, and clearly Kibworth Recycling and Household Waste site will need further investment this year. So there is a lot of growth, not only on the revenue. I know we're going to come to the capital, but just to preface the capital side, it is a huge capital programme. If you look at the data in front of you. I believe over the medium term it's something like £278 million worth. If I might not stand corrected, it's £278 million worth of capital projects. That requires a huge amount of labour and resource from within the department to plan and deliver those capital projects. Quite a lot of that funding will need to be identified through specific grant pots that the government make available, but we're getting rather good at bidding for these money, and I'm hopeful that we'll have elements of success when it comes to procuring those monies to deliver this capital programme. But for an authority of this size to have a £278 million capital programme relating to one department is remarkable, and it's something that we should all be grateful and thankful that the department are working very hard towards achieving. Thank you.
Well, I'm shocked by that, because what I'm hearing is the voice of a county hall bureaucrat, not the voice of somebody who's looking after the money of Leicestershire residents who are going to be asked in this budget to pay an extra 4% on their council tax. And not once did he mention the council tax. Now, we're going to look in detail at the programme, but I would suggest that in running the largest ever capital programme, that's incurring a huge cost on staff and on the council taxpayer, one way or another, and I appreciate there are grants involved. And I think that we need to have regard to the balance of work in the department, and perhaps the lopsided budget we have here, which is heavily weighted towards these major highways programmes that don't often help people but simply put more traffic on the roads. We'll come to the detail later, I'm sure, Chair.
We'll now move on to growth. Who wants to take that? Anne, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. You'll see there, Appendix B sets out in detail the growth across the department, but some key ones picked out for you here if I have a few moments to take them through, if that's okay, Chair. First one, G17 SEN transport, and again, Blake has already referred to this. 2.6 million in the first year, rising to 4.3 million. We have continually, over the last 5 years, decades, seen significant growth across this budget area, to the extent at the moment we're seeing 5% growth in numbers every year, and what's roughly equating to a 5% growth in budget demand because of the increasing complexity of delivery. So overall, significant growth has been happening, is continued to go on that budget. One other factor we point out here is our colleagues in children's services are looking to provide more provision within the county and obviously locally. We will look very carefully at the impacts on transport for that, and if we could get potential savings there. Obviously a good news story, additional facilities within the county. The next one again relates to something that Blake mentioned, the capital programme and the size of the capital programme we have. This was about funding posts that will ensure we have the robustness in order to deliver that significant capital programme. Massively different from what we've had before. We need to have the processes and that level of reassurance that we can deliver, and we're managing costs and we're managing risks around that, and that's what that one is about. The market premium, G19, that is about, we are in a very competitive market at the moment, and the kind of key skills we need are directly in competition with the likes of HS2, Highways England, massive constructions, house builders. You know, as you know, there's a lot going on out there, and we have done some fairly robust work around justifying certain posts that we are offering a market premium to either retain skills or to attract skills in to Leicestershire County Council. The additional post under SEND, again, that reflects the increasing numbers we're having to deal with, therefore increasing staff, you know, additional staff resources are needed to deliver that service. G21, developing external funding bids, 200,000 of growth. This is the funding that's required to literally put in funding bids. Government requires business cases, that requires modelling, traffic data, assessment, strategic cases, a significant amount of work. just to give you an idea, for a major capital scheme, you're looking at maybe 10% of your capital costs, could be in the millions. These are funding bids for much smaller schemes, particularly local pinch point scheme we're bidding for at Marker Harbour, and challenge fund maintenance schemes for challenge fund bid, which is for funding for Zoch Bridge replacement. Community and parish engagement, that's an initiative in terms of being more proactive with the parish councils and communities in talking to them, taking forward initiatives they might want to see that are happening on the ground, and just improving that overall engagement and link, because as we all know, often highways and transports is a key issue for many communities, whole host of issues under that, and we're trying to up our game on those communications and helping communities and addressing those issues they're raising, and that's what that is about, putting in a wee bit more resource to deal with that. So we've actually now got people to go out and talk to communities on a more frequent basis than we have in the past. School crossing patrols, the funding sources for that have now disappeared, and increasingly things like requirements around national living wage, etc., were challenged in funding that service. So that 275,000 is to go towards the delivery of the school crossing patrol service. Forestry, we had historically have always overspent in that budget, and we're seeing increasingly in terms of climate change, stormy, windy conditions. We've also got ash dieback. There's just an ongoing level of work there, and this growth is in recognition of the managing our highways, trees, and minimising any potential risk from that. Highway maintenance, this is, and Blake referred to this in his introduction, this is an additional 3.5 million that is proposed into our base maintenance budgets. This is not about improving the condition of the network. This is about to ensure the ongoing safety of the network. So that's what we think, over and above our base budgets and the grant we get from government, we require in order to keep our network safe. It won't deliver improvements. This is about, and it won't stop the trend we've got of a deteriorating network condition, but it's about dealing with those safety aspects and making sure we're doing that. And the additional 3.7 there, the last point, G26 under the highways and transport element, this is an additional one-off funding for next financial year across a whole host of measures, the types of things that members will see in their inbox: additional grass cutting, the vegetation, hedges cutting back, the edge works, bit more signing, bit more lining, bit more into drainage. Drainage, unfortunately, is a major issue at the moment, and there's another report on the agenda for that. So that will be spread over a whole host of different services to give a wee bit of a boost there in what we see on the ground next financial year. Moving on to the environment and waste side of the department, that growth under waste tonnages, we always work on the premise of 1% increase in growth, 1% increase in waste across the county per year, because actually we're getting more residents, there's more households there, they all generate waste, we need to deal with that. So that's a continuation of that 1% growth in response to that additional demand. Climate change, waste initiatives, an area for an additional 0.27 million for staff there to deal with new initiatives that are coming out. Delivery of a new waste transfer station, looking at our long-term residual waste options, our waste disposal options at maybe a regional level, looking at some other initiatives to grow reuse. We know that's something we want to do, and there's potentially an income stream from that, so we're looking to grow that. So this is about enabling us a resource to take those initiatives forward. And I just touched on, but that the G29, 50,000, that is looking at this potential study work with interested partners. Is there a long-term regional waste facility opportunity, say 2030 onwards, that we would want to invest in? Is there a business case to take that forward for our long-term waste disposal strategy? And that's about very early work to look, to allow us to take that forward, to understand if there's a case there. Right, that takes me to the end of the growth section. I'm going to turn over the page. I'll finish there.
Thank you very much. Thank you for very detailed growth proposals. And it sounds though you all have been working extremely hard. Mr Payne, did you want to make any comments?
Thank you, Chairman. Not at this stage.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Mr Bolt.
That's all right, don't worry. G18. I tend to agree with my colleague, Mr Hunt. Very nice to have this extra work going ahead and welcome it. But, you know, it's a balancing act, isn't it? We can find money to find staff to pay for these posts, yet we can't find money to pay for some of the community transport that we're doing, which is being cut, and all the transport budgets are being cut. So it's interesting we can find money for some things and not others. So it's just a criticism that have we got the balance right on that? And one a bit nearer to home for me, and I'm sure some other members, on G22. Members may remember I raised this at full council, where the department is engaging with parish clerks and parish councils. But if you're not parish, there's no engagement. And Mr Rhodes said it was a good point, he'd look into it. I've heard nothing since full council. So I don't know if Mr Payne wants to answer that one, because it does put some councils at a disadvantage to others if the department's not being even how it handles the complaints. So that's all at this one at the moment.
I think there'll be two responses, one from the corporate director, one from myself. Just on the point about where we're finding the money from to invest in capital projects, I think we need to recognise there's been a lot of growth over the last 10 or 15 years, and the planning system, when it permits growth, it also asks those applicants and developers that have successful planning applications to make a contribution to mitigate the impacts of some of that growth. And a lot of this capital programme is arising because of the growth in Leicestershire, and a lot of the funds for this capital programme will come through the Section 106 and the usual mechanisms. We also, as I previously said, bid to government for substantial amounts of monies, millions and millions of pounds, to enhance junctions and to mitigate the impact of the growth in Leicestershire. Now, I'm not suggesting that we have enough money. We can always do with more money. There's no end of projects that we'd like to see come to fruition. There are safety projects that we'd like to see come to fruition, but there are models and there are avenues for us to attract that money. But most of the money that we spend on capital programmes is raised through the planning system and through government grants. And that, of course, funds the personnel and the labour that's necessary to deliver those projects too. On the second point about parish, it does actually say community engagement, and I remember standing up and responding to this point at a full council meeting. It's our intention to engage with communities and parishes. Just because maybe a town doesn't have a town council or a parish council does not prohibit them from accessing the support that we're proposing here. I have spoke before about the intention of these funds, and I'll let the director explain further what we intend to do on this programme.
Thank you very much. Anne, thank you.
Thank you, that. And just to reiterate what Blake says, is community and parish. I'm sorry if that was my omission in introducing that item there. We're more than happy. We fully recognise a number of areas in the county do not have parishes. We more than are happy to engage with those communities. If they come through the local member, that's more the better, and make those representations, and we're happy to engage with them the same way as with the parish. In terms of what's happening there, the team has been in place since October, so they are now really getting into full swing of their work, and that covers going out to communities and meeting with them on various issues, taking up new initiatives with them. There was a meeting last night, the night before, 2 nights ago, which went very well, and we're doing a number of those, and those are building up. So we're happy to take requests via communities or via parishes to do that. We're also doing things like designs for schemes that communities would want to see put in, whereas before traditionally we would have charged for that. We now have a certain amount of time or value that actually we will now fund through this initiative so that the community doesn't have to find that funding. We've done some additional, and the request of the community is tree and hedge cutting. We're looking at very specific initiatives such as wildflowers. That was very topical last summer, and I'm sure it'll come up this year. What are we doing where communities want to see, rather than grass cutting cutting, have a wildflower verge. That team's working with the community to agree the areas, how it will be managed, that kind of thing. And there's a host of initiatives that will come forward. They're beginning just to get up and running now. So, you know, please, members know they're there. You know, they are engaging.
Thank you very much, Anne. Max.
Just on that last point, Chair, I don't think we should kid ourselves. This is a parish fund. I've never seen any of it in Loughborough, and we're still waiting for complaints about the congestion on the A512 over the junction because of these so-called road improvements that are going on. So we're not very happy about that. But the one I wanted to raise was G23, which is the school crossing patrols. And I do wish this had been taken as a joined-up look at traffic outside schools, because I know that Councillor Payne has been very interested and very engaged with parking problems outside schools, in particular the school clear zones, and that's good. But here we have one of the reasons why not so many people walk their children to school or allow their children to walk to school, because some of the crossing patrols perhaps aren't there that they were. We've lost 800,000 a year, and we're getting 275,000 back, according to the figures here. But my view is that we should be looking at this problem in a much more holistic way. You know, why are there so many parking problems outside schools? Why do we not have apparently enough crossing patrols? And how do we use our enforcement teams? We pay the districts on contract to run civil enforcement schemes to manage parking. And yet most of that is done levying fines on people parking around the town centre, certainly in my town. Rather than at the 5 o'clock time, maybe not doing so less in the town centre, coming out and looking at what's going on outside schools. So I really think there's an opportunity here which has been lost. And I would like to know whether we're still going to continue with the camera car that's been funded, I think, for a limited amount of time, 2 years, I think. So that's my concern on the budget, and perhaps that could be reflected in the minutes when they come out.
Do you want to come back on that, Anne?
There's a number of points I can maybe ask, and forgive me if I don't get them all, because there was quite a lot of them there. In terms of the camera car, we are looking at we will be continuing it, and we're looking at expanding it, getting a second one. Yes, because one, it can enforce the zigzag lines outside the schools, and also members may be aware we have red routes up near the airport, and also if we have bus stops with the yellow markings at it in the right order, a clear way at it, we can also enforce them from the car as well, which is obviously an added benefit. So we are looking at expanding that one. In terms of the join up around about schools, we do have, under our Safe and Sustainable team, we have we will work with schools under their travel planning. We have had various initiatives, and I think we've had a lot of learning from the one particularly that Blake has been is aware of, which was an initiative, school Keep Clear Zone around Millfield Primary in Braunston, and we've had a lot of learning there, and that was about joining up about travel plan with parking restrictions, with park and stride initiatives, that kind of thing, working with the school and working with the community. And we've had a lot of learning from that about how we might want to disseminate and go forward working with other schools who, you know, come to us with issues. And I think we all know there's a lot of those across the county. I think the only other thing you said about, you know, school crossing patrols, why is there not enough of them? Now, school crossing patrols apply to primary schools. We can have a very... Sorry, I thought you made a comment about not enough. I was just going to... We have lost some, yes, because they don't technically require a crossing patrol at it when we have done the assessment for it. But the other thing is, even where they do require them, we can have some extreme difficulties in actually recruiting to them. And we will work with the school, we'll work with the local member, we'll work with the parish if there is one, to try and encourage somebody from the community to come forward in that role. But it can be very difficult, so we are challenged on that one as well.
Before I come to you, Blake, I'm sure if you want to bring this issue up outside of the meeting, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to reaffirm that we intend to continue the mandatory school zigzag scheme, and we've already authorised the acquisition of another vehicle to do just that. It's a very positive scheme. There's been quite a lot of engagement. On the school crossing patrols, one of the issues that we've again spoken about at full council and previously here at the scrutiny meeting is where there are vacancies for school crossing patrol officers. Usually these are local people that will come forward, but we are struggling to recruit people who are willing to come forward and take on these roles, in spite of the growth item in the proposals before you today, where we're going to put some more money into the school crossing patrols. We are dependent on people coming forward, applying for the job and accepting the job, and I think we as councillors have a role to play here. We know our local communities better than anyone else, and if we know there is a vacancy, for instance in Hinckley, I think we could do perhaps more to try and recruit and raise awareness about the vacancy, because I know communities do like school crossing patrol officers, and I've had discussions with officers about using members in their areas as, if you like, a focal point, a promotional, in a promotional way to try and recruit school crossing patrol officers.
Right, thank you. Mr. Harrison, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. From my point of view, Madam Chairman, I thoroughly welcome this strategy that's put forward, this budget. When you think of the background of the worst funded organisation counting the whole of the country, and yet we've been so successful in handling our budgets and how we control this business to be voted for the third successive year the most efficient upper tier, that's county and unitary authorities in the whole of the country. I think that needs an applaud. When you look at the implications of what we've been told today, with 278 million development programme, and people are saying, well, you've got to have more staff. But I always get people saying, we've got a problem with this road, we've got problems with that. And here we're trying to find proper solutions as we move forward. Now that needs to be applauded. And I think when we also reflect on this department, that over the last 10 years, the 42 million contribution towards the 200 million of savings of this authority, no wonder people are amazed at how we run the business and answer all the needs to the way that we do and the level that we do. This is really fantastic. But then to announce 9.9 new money coming in to support what we're doing. I think, you know, we can all sort of pare things around the edges, but this is a most significant announcement and budget, and I thoroughly thank the officers and Blake for all the work that must have gone in to try to ease all this together and put this jigsaw of figures and demands, because we all know we receive demands regularly from all the people we represent. And how do we fit it all together? Well, they've been able to fit this together, and I salute them and thank them very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Ms. Poland.
Thank you, Chair. Just want to comment on G23, the school crossing patrol item again. This is something that I've had quite a lot of experience of in Quenenborough. This committee, in fact, has seen reports and presentations on the village, and one of the things we've been looking to do to sort of help with the issues is recruit a school crossing patrol officer. But as you say, recruitment has been very, very difficult, and part of the reason for that, we think, is that the hours that you do, I don't think you do a full hour in the morning and in the afternoon. I think it's £9 something or other that you get paid, and that obviously then commits your day in quite a significant way. So one of the ideas we put forward in Quenenborough was to work alongside the parish council. It was their idea really, rather than mine initially, to make it a more meaty role. So you have someone who might work for the parish council where appropriate, maybe like a village handyman or someone who could then, as part of their duties, be a school crossing patrol officer. It hit problems when we proposed it with a whole range of HR issues, but to be honest with you, maybe this could be the basis of something moving forward, so that people, you know, get a meatier role out of the job.
Any more questions? Mr. Blake, do you want to come back on that?
If I can just respond to both of those points. Firstly, Mr. Poland, James Poland, I think he makes a really, really good suggestion. I actually saw the email that came in from your parish, which was obviously supported and promoted by yourself. And I think we need to take a closer look at that idea. I did actually raise it at a lead member meeting, and there was a discussion, and you quite rightly identified there are issues, but I think that's the kind of out-of-box innovative thinking that will provide the solutions to these challenges that we face in our communities. And I think we need to take another look, if we haven't already, at that particular suggestion, because I think it's a very, very interesting proposal to look at. And just to come back on Mr. Harrison's point, I think he makes a solid point. We all know we're the lowest funded county council in the country. We've been engaged in a fairer funding campaign. Only last week, have the County Councils Network released a report demonstrating that London has nearly 3 times the amount of money spent per mile of road than we do here in the East Midlands. I think it's like £64,000 or £67,000 versus £23,000. This can't continue, because within that context we are making decisions and proposing budgets that I believe we're trying to look after our communities. We're putting as much money as we can at the front line so our communities benefit. I'd love to put a lot more. We could do a lot more if we had the same kind of funding as you see in Surrey and London. Unfortunately, that isn't the case at the moment. We'll keep pressing, but hopefully the day will come where we do have that money. And given that we, I believe, spend it wisely, underpinned by the Empower report that demonstrates we're the most productive council in the country, upper tier council in the country, I think we could do so much with a better deal from central government, and I look forward to the day when we get that deal.
Thank you. Mr. Bill. Yeah.
Madam, picking up Mr. Poland's point about school crossing patrols and the possibility of working in with the parish councils to achieve, I wonder if I could suggest another possible area for investigation. That is whether the school crossing patrol people could also help with traffic enforcement. The problem we have in the urban areas, is that we now have massive primary schools, and of course, especially this time of the year, most of the parents, a lot of the parents, bring the children in by car, and this causes congestion. Now I know that we've got the camera car and we've got and other devices, but I'm just wondering whether there could be some sort of link up between the patrols and the enforcement people, so that the patrols can actually see for themselves what's happening on the ground. And it's just that if you are examining it, could just look at that as a further extension.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bill.
The other side of the coin, the savings one. The first line there, ET one on page 20, is our revised passenger transport policy, and this is looking at the funding we have and making savings on the funding we have for subsidising bus routes across county. Just to give you the context and to remind you that 94% of the network is commercially provided, so we're looking at that other 6% that we support as a county council. That is actually, just to clarify you, we are still on track to make the full saving. However, what we're doing under this proposed MTFS is reprofiling that. What we've found in our experience of implementing the policy that came to scrutiny and was approved by Cabinet, that actually it's more complex and takes a great deal more time than we had anticipated in actually at the outset of this exercise. And in addition, at the same time, we are dealing with service withdrawals from the commercial operators and having to apply them under the policy as well. So that is in effect having a time delay in the full implementation of the saving. However, we're still on track to deliver it. It's just reprofiled. The second one is the review of the social care and SEN transport, and members will be aware there was we agreed a policy as the Cabinet approved that policy, and we were on for implementing. However, we had a judicial review. We got the result of that, the findings of that last summer, which found in our favour. However, and we are on with planning for implementing that new policy come September this year. However, we must highlight to you that there is an appeal on one aspect of the proposal, and that hearing is due at the end of February. So obviously we will need to see what comes out of that hearing. We are planning for implementing, however, there is an element of risk there, so we will have to see how that goes. The staff absence is a standard one we have, but I think it's worthwhile noting, and all credit to managers across the department, we have had a over the last, I would say, 3-4 years, concerted effort to manage absence, to support staff to ensure they can come back to work as soon as they are able. And we have taken our absence rate down from just over 9 days per FTE full-time employee to 8.53. And we are continuing with that work. Moving to the environment and waste side of the department in terms of savings, under the RHWS there were 3 aspects to those savings. The first one is reducing the summer opening hours from 7 p.m. to 5 p.m. At our RHWS sites, our recycling household waste sites. That's been out to consultation. Members are further considering it in light of our funding settlement from government, which obviously we heard about just recently, and that will be come forward in the MTFS as it goes to Cabinet. The second aspect of that is insourcing Whetstone. Whetstone is the one RHWS site that isn't run directly by us. We will be bringing that in the autumn of this year, October. The third aspect of that particular saving is the reuse. I did touch on it earlier. The reuse side of what we see coming into our sites. Actually, how do we build a business? As we know, some people put out a lot of stuff that actually is still usable and other people would want to see. So we have an ongoing stream of work that's looking at building that aspect of the business across our RHWS. The trade waste income, that literally is what it says on the tin. It's increasing levels of income coming from trade, which we as a municipal disposal authority do not have to take free of charge, so there's a charge for that. The residual waste strategy is seeing savings through increasing use of existing contracts or as putting in place new contractual arrangements for waste disposal and achieving savings through those contractual arrangements. The third aspect of that is the delivery of a waste transfer station, which will drastically improve our resilience in terms of waste disposal, and that you will see later in the capital aspect of the department's work. Green waste tonnages continue to go down across the county, so reduced tonnages to dispose of, reduced cost to us, therefore we get a saving, and ongoing savings from contracts. We have very many contracts under our waste side of the business, and our bulk haulage in particular is driving savings through that one, and improved rates through that. In terms of the next iteration coming forward, for future savings the department will be offering up or could offer up. A couple of things there just to highlight for you. Street lighting. We're looking at the opportunities of providing street lighting services for the likes of developers in the county. We have the technology, we have the people with the skills and the expertise, we've got street lighting engineers, we can put them in, we can design systems, from the cradle to the grave. So we're looking at the opportunities of income streams through providing that service for third parties. We're also reviewing our temporary traffic management, so when we have to go out and do roadworks, etc. Temporary traffic management, believe it or not, is actually a very expensive service. Anytime you do any roadworks, the traffic management sometimes can cost more than the actual works themselves. But we're looking at that process to drive efficiencies through that as well. So there are just a couple I would highlight. There's a lot of other work ongoing, but that's what I'd highlight. Thanks, Chair.
Yes, I admire your desire to push on, but I do. Yes, I don't want to detain you. Just a couple of 2 or 3 observations on this report. I think it's unfortunate that that having, as we all thought austerity was ending, that we're still having to continue the cuts. I think that's somebody is going to have to explain that somewhere. The bus services, I think this is a tremendously sensitive one, I know that there's a rolling programme of looking at various parts of the county, but I hope that I hope that these will be looked at from the point of view that, quite honestly, the bus is the only public transport available to remote areas. The only transport indeed for people who can no longer drive, and this you have to look at the impact on communities, even though those communities might be small. The SEN reduction, that's a little bit unfortunate because we haven't yet finished the discussions with we haven't yet completed the judicial review process, and there's going to be a meeting with MPs that we've heard about. So I hope we're not jumping the gun by cutting the budget regardless of the outcome and regardless of what the MPs might be able to achieve. I know it's an obvious point which we've made many times before, but on the household waste sites, we have a continuing and a worsening problem with fly tipping. And I know that the sort of people who would normally go to the tip are not the same sort of people who would go to who bespoil the verges and farm gates. But there is a perception there that the more you reduce the hours of waste sites, the more that we are opening ourselves up for this dreadful unsociable habit of dumping. Could I just mention under savings as well, street lighting. There's a real problem with this, not with the county lights, because they are, you can ring up and they're fixed very quickly, and I think we're all grateful to the fact that we've got such a good service. But there are now an increasing number of private street lights, streets which are due to be adopted, and because of some technical reason, they're not being adopted. And it really is a difficult job to get private owners to actually fix these lights. So if we could actually take over some of these private street roads, the lighting, if that's what intended. Well, if it's not intended, I think we ought to look into it, because the people who live on these roads are getting concerned because of the delays in getting their lights switched back on. And one last point: temporary traffic management. Well, it couldn't be worse. Whatever you do to this, it can't be worse than the situation we have where you and I live, Chairman. Every road seems to have a roadworks on it. We've really got to improve the means by which roadwork entries are coordinated or not coordinated, because I can't believe how many times the Victorian water pipes have to be dug up. I keep on being told they're Victorian and they're almost 200 years old, but once you've done it, you've done it. So why do you have to keep on? Why does the water board, why do the gas people have to keep on going back to the same roads over and over again and leaving us all in dreadful queues? But perhaps that's just an Earl Shilton and Hinckley problem. But it really is a problem that getting home from here takes an hour longer than it ought to.
I think some of the issues with the Severn Trent and the gas and that, you better take it up with them, Mr. Bill.
I quite like Mr. Blake. Mr. Payne, it sounds. Can I just respond to some of Mr. Bill's points? The first two about the savings that he's alluded to. It's an accounting peculiarity how they've been formatted on the sheet, but they're not actually savings. They might be under the savings total, but they're positive figures, not negative figures. So, for instance, ET1SR, the revision of the passenger transport policy, that's actually £60,000 that we're not proposing to save. We're carrying it forward. It's not going to be a saving this year. We're saying we can't save it because one of the reasons we've introduced a policy, and what we're finding, although only 6% passenger bus journeys within the county are actually subsidised by the authority. 94%, as you know, are commercially operated. We're finding more and more bus routes. The commercial operators are serving notification, which is their legal right and duty to do so. And in those cases, because we have a policy, we're assessing the impact of the cancellation of those commercial routes against our policy, and we're having to intervene. So we're actually spending more money than we ever have on supporting passenger transportation services. But it's because we've got this policy that we've now adopted that we're able to have a fair basis from which to make these decisions and therefore move forward by supporting bus services. So that isn't actually a saving, that's an increase. On the implementation of the review of social care transport, again, that's not a saving. I started off in my introduction that we've had an overspend this year accounting for about £1.7 million. It's a real pressure, not only on the E&T department, which are responsible for looking at the transportation needs of SEM eligible people, but also for the Children and Families Department. And it's because of that pressure we're conceding that's not going to be a saving this year. It might be into the savings total, but it won't be a saving because it's not a negative figure. I have to commend the work of the Environment Department who look after the waste sites, and it's because of the decisions we took a few years ago to bring those sites, because that's where the data was leading us in-house, that we're able now to make further savings on the running of those sites while still keeping an acceptable level of public satisfaction with the running of those sites. Anne's already spoken about the demand-led nature of waste. When the waste goes down, it costs us less to dispose of. So we're benefiting in terms of some of the savings because of the demand-led nature there. But on the final point with streetlights and the adoption, I don't think that is going to be something we'll be looking at. The reason being is when a developer comes along and they're not prepared to spend the money to develop out the development to an adoptable standard, which includes the streetlights, I struggle to see why we, with our stretched budget, should come along and then supplement and make those areas to an adoptable standard at great expense when actually the developers could have done that and they opted not to do that. And when people obviously have bought their property in these new developments that have gone through a conveyancing process, and they should be made aware of the non-adoptable status of the particular area. So whilst I understand the problem, my understanding is in most cases there might be a management company that are responsible for looking after those unadopted areas or the streetlights in those areas, and it should be for that management company and the trustees that oversee those management operations to make those decisions and put the investment in that's needed to make sure that those streetlights are operating in a satisfactory way. But I do not feel that it's our responsibility to take up the slack which the developers have left. Thank you.
Can I just add to a couple of points, if that's all right? Firstly, I would want to reassure Mr. Bill, in terms of the passenger transport policy in that review, we do start very much from the point of view of looking at the impact on the community. That's exactly what the criteria around the policy is. It's about access to key services and it's assuring those communities have it. Where there isn't a strong case to continue a bus, we will look at a demand responsive transport. So, you know, your point about in remote areas, if people don't have access to a car, the bus is the only option. Actually, if that community doesn't have a strong case to continue a traditional bus service, we will look at something like a demand responsive service. So we wouldn't leave an area high and dry. So I wanted to give you that bit of assurance. The policy comes from the point of view of looking at the impact on the community and how we ensure they meet specific needs, i.e. access to certain services. I think the only other one I would maybe pick up on, in addition to what Blake has said, is in terms of roadworks. We do have a permitting system which gives us, as a highway authority, an ability to an extent to manage the works out there. Anybody needing to work on the highway, and let's face it, actually, some of the work will be ours in terms of fixing the roads and highway maintenance and drainage, etc. like that. Some will be developers because they have a planning consent and they need to build a new roundabout access or something to their development, and some is the utilities, Western Power, Severn Trent, Cadent, etc., etc. Now, of those, where they have plan works, they have to give us advance notice, etc., and give us their plans and show they have looked at the impact on traffic. Now, my officers who deal with that will talk to you for hours about how challenging that can be to get that information and adequate information. Our role is to challenge them on how they are doing the work. Does it need to have a peak hour thing? You know, we can make them open. Sometimes we have the powers to, the ability to say, for instance, take the roadworks off at 3 p.m. so they aren't there during the peak hour. Sometimes that's not feasible. The nature of the works is such, if there's a massive trench across the road, they can't fill it in every day. So there's kind of limited things we can do, and we can certainly challenge them on the duration, etc. Where they don't comply with the conditions of the permit, where they overrun their duration, for instance, we can fine them. But actually, the amount we fine them is peanuts to the likes of Severn Trent, etc., etc. So it can be very difficult. The other thing I would say, if they're emergency works, if we have a collapsed sewer or anything, they have every right just to go into the highway and, you know, put their traffic management on and close the highway to deal with that. So again, we have very limited control. So while we do our best to coordinate these agencies and coordinate the works across the county, I would just stress to you there are some, you know, limitations within the existing system. So absolutely sympathise there. We all are out there using the roads, and it impacts on all of us, but we do our best to try and manage that as much as possible.
We now come to any more. I'm getting paranoid.
To come back to Blake and street lighting, I think that I think that we have a responsibility to represent people, all the people, whether they live on an adopted road or not, and it's the people who do not, and there's an increasing number of roads which were given planning consent on the basis that the road would be adopted, where the developers are not fulfilling their responsibilities, and it's leaving people. The fact that the street light has gone out, that is a visible thing, but what's happening to the sewers under the road? I think that we're building up real problems for the future, because we're burying problems and we're allowing developers to get away with not completing their undertakings to homeowners, and there's a problem for all of us here, which will have to be addressed by somebody.
If I may respond, it's up to the local planning authority to enforce planning conditions. If a development has been permitted on the basis of an adoptable standard road or lighting system, well, it's up for the planning authority to make sure that development complies with that. We're not compelled to force them to do that. We don't have the powers to do that. Where an area is an adoptable standard, we will discharge our duties. We have a legal duty to do that, and we'll maintain as such.
Right, we now come on to, there's no more questions. External influences and other funding sources.
I shall be brief. Members will be aware, because it's in the report every year, you know, fuel. We are at the mercy of the prices of fuel. An awful lot of our activities we need fuel for, so, you know, we have to react to that. Similarly with waste tonnages, as I mentioned earlier before, we worked on, you know, household waste 1% per annum. That changes, we have to deal with it. So, you know, again, market-led, as is the prices of recyclates, and there is some detail there about the massive swing in value of some of the recyclates out there, of which some of our bases of our, you know, funding calculations are made on. Those big changes can have significant impact, but we are at the mercy of the market on those things. And the last one there at the top of page 23, the National Resources and Waste Strategy, government came out with that, and there's a whole host of consultations coming out with it, and we're yet to see what does come to fruition. But there's some fairly significant things in there: potential tax on waste incinerations, food disposal, you know, compulsory food disposal, etc., which will have implications both for ourselves and the district authorities. But we will need to see what comes to fruition over time. But again, we will have to react to that. Other funding sources, paragraph 22, just gives you, I'm going to leave that to you to come back to me on questions if you want, but gives you a range of some of the things we get in from either grant funding or income streams for us that go into that overall net budget position.
Thank you.
Yes, Chair, just a couple of points. I'm interested in when we're going to get the results of this government consultation, when the paper's actually coming out. We had it almost a year ago they started these papers. We read through them and sent our comments off to Joanne, and she sent our comments off, but you know, there's no action yet on that. I don't think. But also, civil parking enforcement. I think the county's missing a bit of a trick here, because if you go to some of our town centres in an evening, people are parked all over the road on double yellow lines, but our parking people knock off work at, is it 5 or 6 o'clock? So all these people cause hazard on the road. If we had a scheme where we actually went out in evenings on a regular basis and taught people the error of their ways, I think it could be quite a large income generation for the county council.
Through you, Chair, shall I just address the first point? In terms of the National Resources and Waste Strategy, you're right, we submitted some very detailed responses to a number of consultations. They have reacted to those and they have been published by government. What they've intimated in that, it was always the start of a series of consultations, and I've fed back as part of other performance reports. What we anticipate, we have followed up with government. It acknowledged that, for example, proportionate to respondents, what percentage of collection authorities and disposal authorities were in favour of or not for free green waste collections that the districts offer, or their ability to afford weekly food waste collections, which they're suggesting will need to be introduced in 2023. What they've said is they will issue another round of consultations to refine their final position on how this will be rolled out from 2023, and we're expecting those consultations in around May. So we will be analysing them and commenting on the next iteration of consultation.
It will come to committee then, will it? Chair, what mechanism are we going to have? Because last time it was rather quick response time and in between committee meetings, and we couldn't get it to committee, so we had to be lead members have to comment.
My understanding is we agreed at this committee, because of the complex nature of the consultations, they asked hundreds and hundreds of questions across the thousands of pages, which was challenging with the timescale for colleagues to be able to offer input against the tight timetable. It didn't work well for this committee to be able to just digest that. So the agreement subsequently is that officers will need to hit those timetables and respond, but we will keep you advised as government finalises its position. That's what we agreed. I've got a minute somewhere in terms of what the committee decided to do. Obviously, I would be compelled, duty bound, to make sure if I think there were any substantial things that this committee should and would want to understand, then I should bring those back in a separate report.
I think, Chair, that the minute being referred to, also got a copy of it. If the committee cycle fitted in with the consultation, it would come to committee. If not, it fell to officers, plus they would leave members to actually make the comments.
Anne, would you like to comment?
The point about the CEOs in the evening parking, we are actually under the scheme and the guidance in terms of DFT and the rules and regs and all the rest of it. We're not actually allowed to make income on civil enforcement parking. What this is, while it says income there, we provide a service of notice processing for the district council, so they pay us for that service. So while we're calling it income, is covering the staff costs in order to provide that service for the districts. And the point about evening parking, the objective of actually enforcing parking is to ensure that our market towns and are thriving, etc. They're not clogged up, so people want to come to them, they support the economy, they support the businesses, etc. It's to actually have that turnover and make sure the road network works appropriately. Evenings, that is far less of an issue. If people are parking in such a way that's a hazard, that is then a police matter, and they could enforce that any time of the day. But really, the regs are about, the objective is about ensuring and supporting the economy, making sure the transport network is working efficiently, not about we're not technically allowed to make income.
Thank you. Mr. Payne.
Yeah, thank you. Just from my, Blake will do, and Sharon, just from my perspective, yeah, we shouldn't be using our regulatory powers to drive income and revenue for the authority because we can. That just seems completely at odds with any reasonable sense. Similarly with the average speed cameras, we all know we're in a discussion and a campaign with government to get them to alter the rules so we can keep some of the money arising out of the penalties, but not to make any surpluses, but just to support the evolution. Our objective is to manage behaviour change, you know, where people are behaving in contradiction to the highway code or speeding through our communities and blighting those communities. We want those motorists to change their behaviour. We don't want to drive revenue from them to support our general budget. So the notion that somehow we should use our regulatory powers to drive revenue doesn't sit well with me.
Okay, thank you very much, Blake.
I've been waiting to. Right. Yeah, I think Councillor Morgan would be interested in the response you just made, Blake, because Chelmsford Borough Council, along with other district councils, make a lot of money out of allowing people to park in the town centre. It's only the Borough Council, as your limited predecessor, Phil Crossland, used to say, is we're operating streets on which people can park freely, whilst the Borough Council, district councils are picking up nice little income from allowing people to park in their car park. So there is a discontinuity there. And the question I had, Chair, was to ask Blake in particular, perhaps, what's happened to the parking strategy that appeared on so many MTFSs in the past and has now disappeared completely?
Would you like to come back, Blake?
Yeah. Just on 2 points. The first one about what borough and district council do. I'm not going to comment. I'm not here to speak on behalf of borough and district councils, except to say off-street parking is wholly different. You know, where any entity, whether it be a private organisation or indeed a council, owns a piece of land and they make that land available for transportation, and it's in, if you like, a quasi-private or even public-private ownership, well, those decisions should be made at the appropriate level. But as far as we're concerned, when it comes to on-street parking, I don't believe we charge for on-street parking in the whole of the county. On the parking strategy, that was subject to previous scrutiny, where was a number of proposals that we suggested might be explored. And as you recall, some of those proposals we decided to drop. The overarching ambition, though, which is to rationalise traffic regulation orders and lining, etc., that is still going ahead and it's being done routinely. It's managing, as the director has just mentioned to me, it's called managing traffic in our communities, and that's done on a monthly and annual basis, area to area.
Clarifying that, if I may say, that Councillor Payne put it forward and then withdrew it because a scrutiny committee didn't want it. Is that right?
No. Like I say, there are elements of the parking strategy which has now turned into managing traffic in our communities that are still going ahead. There are other elements that we decided wasn't viable, so therefore we didn't continue. We hadn't fleshed out our full proposal, said we were going to look at that to see whether it stuck up. It didn't stack up at the time after that evaluation, and therefore we used common sense, and when we pursued the policies that were deliverable, and we dropped the policies that weren't.
Mr. Bolter.
Clarification, Chair. Yeah. I didn't mean to charge for on-street parking. I meant to charge to give people notices for people who parked illegally on yellow lines. There's a big difference between the two. I do not want on-street charging for shopping centres. I do want enforcement of yellow lines, which is down to the county council. Distinct difference between the two. Move people on, fine, but if they keep parking there, then they should suffer the consequences of doing so.
Thank you, Mr. Bolter.
Yeah, thank you. Capital Programme, Table 3 on page 24 gives you the summary of the 4 years of the MTFS. As Blake has already said, it's the largest capital programme we've ever had as a department. Can I just make one clarification? Paragraph 25, I know it says the programme in 2021 includes 210 million. It doesn't. The 210 million is actually the major schemes over the 4 years of the MTFS. The actual programme in 2021 is 100 121 million. So apologies for that error and spotting it so late. You'll see there's, and I'm sure you're very familiar because we have talked about a lot of these at different times in the Scrutiny Committee, a number of the schemes that are major schemes that are happening under the capital programme, and Table 4 shows you where we get that funding from, if it's grant funding and where it comes from. The one I would draw your attention to is kind of a third of the way down, Grants Housing Infrastructure Fund, and there's 32 million in the first column. That is still to be confirmed. We're still awaiting the outcome of that funding bid from government, but that's how the capital programme is made up, and particularly a bit more detail for the first year there. I'm probably not going to go into details under paragraph 26, but we'll obviously take questions. Suffice to say that just, again, and the committee will be familiar, our maintenance funding levels are affected by our compliance with the risk-based approach to maintenance, and hence that incentive funding. We could get less funding if we don't show we're at level 3 in applying a risk-based approach to maintenance, which again we've talked to this committee about before. Again, we break down. Paragraph 30 gives various schemes that we have and where we've secured external funding for those, so you know which funding sources are coming from. And 31 gives you the latest position in terms of current bids or expressions of interest for schemes across the county. Smaller scale funding pots that the government announced last year, and we've either got expressions of interest in or got funding bids in there for those. So just to make you aware, these are the ones, the next pipeline ones if we're successful, etc. Moving on to the environment waste side of the business. Now, predominantly the key biggies there are the waste transfer station we're looking to develop and deliver, and the Kibworth site redevelopment. There's significant changes we want to make to bring that up to kind of more modern standards, easier to use, ensure we're complying fully with all health and safety, etc. So there's some significant works going there. Beyond that, it's general improvements in drainage works at a number of our sites. Future developments, just to highlight for you lastly, in the capital programme, we have an ongoing capital requirement for vehicles. You know, as you heard earlier, we maintain as a department the county council's vehicles, a fleet of around 400, so there's an ongoing capital requirement for that. And equally, you'll be aware of major roads network. Our current bid we're working up is on the A511. Therefore, you know, we are going through all the government's hoops, and that again, you know, hopefully we'll see in a bit more detail as it comes to fruition, if we're successful in that funding and then delivery. Very last point there, about you're aware of the initial budget allocation of 450,000 in cognizance of the climate emergency declaration and the work that we will need to do in order to take us towards carbon neutral by 2030. That budget is very much about the development work, the initial work, initial study work, assessment work to understand what it is we need to do. As and when those initiatives that we might want to take as a county council to take us to that come forward, they will need to be assessed separately, depending which department it comes under, etc., which activity, as to the business case for it and where it would be funded for. Thank you.
About the department being rather lopsided in terms of major highways projects, as opposed to the other functions that it has to exercise. There are an incredible number of risks involved in these 2 pages. We're talking about the bidding process, which itself is a risk, the wasted time when bids don't work for us, which, as Councillor Payne says, are doing quite well for us at the moment. The weather conditions, delivery timescales, a whole number of risks there. It doesn't actually mention what's most recently come up from government, or was it the Treasury, to alter the value-added estimates of various projects to bias it more away from the south and more towards the less metropolitan areas, so that we may suffer in that. And I think there's just a question of risk which isn't fully quantifiable. And if we were a business and we decided to embark on this size of work in a particular area, which carried this amount of risk, I think we would be seriously in trouble. It's a concern for the future, and you know, the major road projects sound good to many people because it sounds like those advertisements that you see of new cars dashing through open countryside without a traffic light in sight. But in actual fact, as the director said earlier in the meeting, putting more traffic on the road, and in the case of the A512 from Loughborough to Shepshed, it won't make matters any more difficult. In fact, it'll probably make matters worse in the long run because there'll be more traffic seeking those roads.
Blake.
Yeah, I think Max raises a very reasonable point there. There is risk associated with this, absolutely, no one denies that. But it's for that reason that we have to have quality staff, quality professionals that assess the various pots that the government make available, understand the criteria for applying for those monies, assess the chances of being able to access those monies before we sink resource into bidding for these. You know, these are professional skills that we require as an authority on our behalf to be successful ultimately in procuring these bids. So yes, I agree wholeheartedly there is a risk. It is a frustration of mine. I think I've mentioned at a previous scrutiny panel that I went down to the Transport Select Committee in London where Leicestershire County Council was invited to give some evidence, although I wasn't able to speak because Parliament required a female representative to speak on that occasion. We did make the point as a county council, along with other county councils, that the current way the government do business, which is they open up a very limited window of opportunity where we have to have, if you like, shovel-ready schemes, already fully funded schemes to be able to apply for sizable amounts of money to deliver projects locally is not really acceptable. We need a more medium-term approach to funding, not only on the maintenance of our highways, but also for the infrastructure improvements at junctions, etc., which were required to mitigate the impact of growth within Leicestershire. I think those points came across. It's early in the new term of a government, and let's hope that the DFT and the government more generally take on board those points and come up with a formula and a strategy that better supports our objectives here in Leicestershire.
Anne.
And I would just add to reassure members, we do all we can to mitigate those risks, absolutely. We have a good track record of delivering large projects. I did mention the growth item earlier about additional staff to make sure that we have robust processes and the right governance, the right oversight, etc. on projects. In very early stages, we do have built in, I think it's Pat knows more about this than me, around about 40% contingency because of that risk, because we're at an early stage, and when we have more information, when we've done more survey work, when we've done more design work, etc., it's only then that we will actually reduce that level of contingency within a department, because we absolutely understand that there is massive risk in some of these projects. So we just want to reassure members in the committee that we do everything we can in order to mitigate that. Obviously we cannot eliminate it, but we have to manage it, we have to have oversight, and we need to do what we can to mitigate it.
Thank you very much, Anne. Thank you. We've gathered a good debate, and I'd like to thank the officers for all the hard work, which when you sit and listen to all the hard work and the detail that have to go into these reports, I thank you very much. Thank you. So we now follow with item 9, tree management strategy. Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I will now move on to item 9, tree management strategy, pages 37 to 96. And can I now invite Roderick O'Connor, Assistant Director for Corporate Resources, to introduce the paper, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon. If I just give a light overview, first of all, Chair, and provide some context. This is very much work in progress, and we've brought it to the Scrutiny Commission with that in mind. We took the draft paper to Cabinet in November, and we're taking the final version back to November again. We consulted a lot with internal colleagues, particularly in environment and transport, and that is ongoing, and also with external partners. We haven't made huge changes to the actual strategy document itself since November. That's really because of ourselves and others being on leave over Christmas. But we have actually added the action plan with much more detail in there and with a huge focus on tree planting. I think I let Nick, who is the head of forestry and who's been with the County Council for 40 years, to take us through the action plan in a little bit more detail before we take questions. But I think one of the things that we would like to add before it comes back to Cabinet in March, the document very much focuses on our own trees and what we as a County Council actually own. I think the bit that is probably missing is that we also have a role of influence across the County Council. And we have some meetings set up with organisations such as the National Forest Company and the Forestry Commission to actually start to put a little bit more flesh on the bones around of our plan. And we'll actually add those elements of influence, partnership working. And of course, finally, last but not least, trees are a huge part of the County Council's climate change and carbon agenda. And although it is a tree strategy, it actually is a leg of the environmental strategy that Joe Gill is responsible for, and I'm in ongoing dialogue with her and members of her team.
Good afternoon, everybody. If I could just add a little to what Roderick said by way of introduction. We first wrote the tree management strategy for Leicestershire in 2008, and it was revised in 2013. But this current revision, there's been some fairly substantial changes. One in particular, we've commissioned a group to look at the environmental benefits of our tree population in terms of the amount of oxygen that's produced, the amount of carbon that's absorbed and so on. And it actually puts a value on those assets. So it really does highlight the value of our tree and our tree populations. And so with that in mind, the strategy is about identifying a standard for us to manage our tree population going forward in future. But also it's a standard that has regard for both the legal requirements of a tree owner, but also national standards that have been produced in relation to how trees should be managed, in particular how the risk from trees should be managed. And so hopefully the strategy sets a standard that other landowners within Leicestershire can follow and use as a guide. I think with regard to the action plan, the key message that I would like to think comes out of the action plan is the need that we need to escalate our tree planting and sustain that over a number of years in order to address both the climate issue, but also the loss of individual trees within Leicestershire, which over the last 40 years has been substantial. The first contributor to that was Dutch elm disease, but the ash dieback threat is significant, and it will take out a huge proportion of our mature landscape trees, which will have a detrimental effect on our landscape in the short term. It's really important, I think, that we start to look at putting a new generation of trees into the Leicestershire landscape going forward.
Max.
Thanks very much. It's a great report. I've read it twice, actually, and I think Roderick knows why. I want to fully support what's been said about the need to beef up the side which talked about tree planting as tree management. And I refer to page 66, that's right, it's on page 66. It says a substantial and sustained focus on planting is now required in Leicestershire to address the current long-term decline in landscape trees. And I would add to that the carbon question as well. And that's, I think, the bit that everybody would like to see developed somewhat. And perhaps we can put that as a formal recommendation in the report from Scrutiny. There's an interesting line on page 57, which says it's to be said to rise by as much as 3 degrees to 5 degrees by the end of the century. Well, fortunately, none of us will be here at the end of the century. But if we were, I think a 3-degree or 5-degree rise in temperature is catastrophic, not just for the developing world, but for much of Europe as well. And I think that's a misplaced statement. I think what was perhaps intended was that
Thank you. Do you want to respond, Mr. O'Connor? Thank you.
Excuse me. I think Mr. Hunt's correct, and we can rectify that. And he's also correct about the carbon element, and we will pull that out much more strongly when we do the revision.
Mr. Bolter.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I like the report. Like Max, I've read it a couple of times, and it's nice work in progress, and hope we can develop it even more. One thing that did strike me, and I did write into Cabinet, is that when we went on the little jaunt through to Colville, etc., we talked about all the tree planting that was going to take place there, and in the report it said we're going to plant native species. That worried me, because a lot of our native species are no longer sustainable. We've lost elms, chestnut, ash, beech. A lot of our native species have now gone. We need to look at some more of the continental species that will perhaps stand some of our hotter, dry summers than what we've been used to over the years. And I was also thinking about things like home oak, which is the reverse to our normal species. In fact, it grows in the winter and not the summer, and it keeps its leaves throughout the year. So where other trees pack up in the winter, the home oak carries on during the process during the colder months. And I'm not in favour of planting conifers, to be honest, because they cause other problems. But things, other species, more larch, for instance, would be a beneficial species to plant, which we don't seem to plant those. So I think we need to look at the whole environment and what we are planting. It's no good planting trees that aren't going to survive. The new elm that was brought in that's supposed to be resistant to the beetle isn't. We spent lots of money planting these newfangled elms, and they're all dying because the beetle has found a way around the process. So perhaps need to look at a bit wider how we're doing things, but perhaps look to our continental partners, see what we're planting there, see what we can get away with for our warmer climates.
I think Mr. Bartram's absolutely right, and this is something that Nick and I discuss on an ongoing basis, so I'm going to allow him as the expert to answer this question.
Chair, yes, I think it's a very valid point, and particularly with the changes that we've just been talking about with regard to temperature and everything. So the forestry industry generally are looking at the possibilities and the options for planting stock in the future, and in particular looking at species that will maybe have an extensive southern range that goes into southern Europe that would be able to tolerate temperature change. But part of this is actually we need to engage with the nursery industry as well, because many species vary massively genetically, and it's important if you are producing trees to plant in a hotter climate, you source a provenance where the seed are coming from trees that already can withstand those temperature conditions. So I think there's a lot of work to be done nationally regarding that, and a part of our action plan, and I think this is something we can offer that we will develop, is that we engage with nursery suppliers and talk to them about sourcing seed, using the appropriate provenances and so on. So we're actually planting trees that can withstand changes in temperature. I think the use of broadleaf evergreen species is very useful. They produce oxygen throughout the year. They're very good at absorbing pollution, everything. So that's something we can expand in our planting schemes. I think that's a very valid point. And I think the native species point is a valid one, but it is important that we recognise that native species are, if you like, the basis on a lot of our woodland ecosystems, and many birds and plant and animal and insect species rely on those species as well. So we can still plant native species, but perhaps we need to be identifying nursery stock that's been produced from seed collected from southern areas. So there's that ability, that genetic ability to withstand changing temperatures.
Chair, could I just add to that? It's just something that certainly I concede to Mr. Fell's knowledge. He is the knowledgeable person on trees, but it is something that we've been talking about, and it's a valid point around the sort of consistency in the makeup of the tree stock that we might look like. I was going to, if you hadn't already picked it up, we've got to link it in with our biodiversity ambitions and our ecosystems. But something he and I have talked about recently is in regard to biosecurity, because the other counter to that is to make sure that a lot of the disease and pests that, not to overgeneralise, but that find their way into this country, so ash dieback being one, have come from abroad. So there is an opportunity for us to think about strengthening our policies on how we approach purchasing of tree stock so that we sort of enhance our biosecurity going forward.
I agree with your comments on that. Thank you. Mr. Bell, and then I'll come to yourself. Thank you.
Having just broken down in our car in the middle of Thetford Forest, sometimes trees can be sinister as well as beneficial, but that's another story. Back in the 80s, I think it must have been the 80s or early 90s, it was this committee which approved, or this committee or its predecessor, which approved the setting up of the National Forest. It worked. The bid was accepted by the government, and it went ahead. In fact, it was then taken over by the government, but that's another story. But it was in fact the National Forest initiated effectively in this room. So I'm just wondering whether, having listened to the officers this morning, whether we could endorse the move to push forward the case for extending the forest and to increase the tree cover across Leicestershire. I don't know how far it can be extended, but I'm just wondering, could we add that to the recommendations to Cabinet as well, that we endorse and support any move to expand the land coverage of the National Forest.
I shall, Chair. Mr. Bill's thinking resonates with my own. And only last Friday, I met Louise Driver, the Director of Operations from the National Forest Company. The National Forest Company is restricted in a geographical area, but more and more they are eager to actually extend their influence. And they're a very easy partner to work with, one of the easier ones. Nick and I are both working with them. They also have very strong links with colleagues Joe Gill in Environment and Transport. So it's a point well made, and one that we are following up. Mr. Fell and I are also meeting with John Everett, the Chief Executive of the National Forest Company, later in January to feed his comments into the strategy, and we'll pick that point up again with him then.
So that's something that could probably be looked into and pursue at a later date. Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Phillimore.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, gentlemen. First time we've ever met, so that would be me. So I'm the newly elected member for Cosbury with Countersort. I actually really enjoyed reading your report. And I've read a lot of reports over my years, both public sector and business. But I found it incredibly easy to read, extremely informative. It absolutely demonstrates that you've got the finger on the pulse. You know how to lead this council forward on the tree management plan. You're already looking after 420,000, is it? Something like that I read in here. Yeah, lots of trees. So I think as a committee we should actually recognise the competence and the skills and the quality actually of this report, because that makes our life really easy when we're trying to disseminate information. But I think this is an absolutely brilliant report, so thank you. Thank you, Chair. And just out of interest, Chair, if it's okay, may I be excused about 4? I'm clerking a meeting this evening. Thank you.
Any more questions? Oh, sorry, Blake.
It's not a question, it's just to thank Roderick and the Corporate Resources Department for the courtesy of sharing their work with myself and the team. Obviously, Joe Gill, who looks after the environment side of the department's been closely associated with a lot of this work, and there are many interactions, not least between the highways verges work and the trees on the highest verges. We've already spoken about ash dieback and the challenges we face there and what we're doing about it. But it's very useful to have, as Les has quite rightly pointed out, quite a comprehensive strategy that looks into the future and actually prescribes how we're going to deal with what is a really serious issue, not least because of our biodiversity and the character of Leicestershire, but obviously climate change as well. So this is one component. It's a start, and I thank you for bringing it to this panel and sharing it with the department. Just before I finish, could you just remind the members here how many trees we propose to plant within the medium term, or I think it's next year? It's astonishing, the number. I've forgotten it. It's in the tens of thousands, I think. So.
Yeah, I think I'm working from my memory now, but I think we've actually mentioned 80,000 potentially. So we run a suite of schemes to provide incentives for private landowners to plant trees, and I really do think that's a very strong message that we need to send out. And we're already working with colleagues to actually write out to tree wardens and landowners and so on to let them know these schemes are available. So part of that ambitious target is to provide that opportunity for private landowners. But we are looking at our own land holdings. We've done a lot of work, particularly in the National Forest, on country parks in recent years, but we're also looking at farms, and we have one particular farm where we feel we can do a very nice scheme in the short term. Maybe next winter the trees will be planted, so that's something we're looking at the moment and talking to the tenant and the farm's manager.
Did you want to come back on that, Ms. Fillimore, first? Thank you.
If I may, Chair. So, as many county councillors do, I also sit as the district councillor. And one thing it's kind of a bit of a campaign for me. And you've just prompted the same thought, I think, and that is, if I had my way, and if it was possible, and if there's any way of doing it, every new build property that has a rear garden should have a fruit tree, probably columbarium, which is the nature of modern gardens, for a multitude of very good reasons. You know, farm to table, food to table, biodiversity, insects, blah, blah, blah. It just goes on and on and on. So if the officers could take that little thought away from here, Madam Chairman, I just think there's a real opportunity there, even if we only keep 1 out of 3. You know, and we may have to have a handback service if they don't want it in the back garden. But actually, it's a great way. We are scheduled to build a lot of houses over the forthcoming future, and it will all contribute to the programme. So, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Pebland.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just again to echo Les's comments, really, and to say. Increasing numbers of trees is something that I think that is increasingly further up the agenda locally. I read somewhere, I think as recently as this week, that the level of tree coverage in this country is now getting back close to sort of medieval levels, which is fantastic. Within my own division in Thrussington, there's a tree project ongoing there. They've worked very closely with highways to get a good number of trees on the road verges entering the village. So for the two sort of sides, one aesthetically to make it look good, especially for a country village, and obviously the environmental impact that has. And that's really that's not a parish council thing, that's a local group thing that they've organised themselves. And I was at a fundraiser for that as recently as Saturday, which raised well over £1,000 to raise money for those trees, which shows the importance to the community of having that sort of buy-in to improve the look of the area. So really I was just thinking that, well done to those, but also we can maybe look at doing that as a model for other areas that might want to take that on board and might not have thought of doing that, or maybe not even know that highways allowed groups to do that. But you wouldn't need too many villages like Thrussington before you started seeing a very significant impact on the number of trees in our county.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm really interested to hear about the expansion thoughts of the National Forest, because I think it has proven to be such a success. and it's at the time now where we need to expand our trees, and we all acknowledge that. I'd be interested to know what the real expansion, I mean, obviously we're Leicestershire, are they looking to expand in Leicestershire? How would this happen? And being honest, would there be a benefit to us in Leicestershire?
I'll also let Nick come in on this one here. I think the interesting thing about the National Forest Company is they've grown very fast. Well, they've grown over about 25 years. And tree strategies actually tend to be, you know, when you think of growing trees, they almost go up to about 25 years. They're at full capacity. I think they are there's a huge benefit of working with them. One of the not least of which is they give us match funding. But equally, they're a very easy partner to work with. They've got great ambition. So I do actually think they're one of the easiest people to work with. And Nick can talk in a little bit more detail around the match funding. But Scamhazel Farm, for example, the interesting thing about Leicestershire is that we actually are quite restricted in where we can plant trees. Most of our country parks are almost planted up to the maximum. So working with, identifying around the farms that we've got is one of the best ways forward, and working with the National Forest Company is, I do think it makes good sense. Did you want to add, Nick?
Yeah, just I'd briefly. I'm of an age where I saw the National Forest come about. I've then had the opportunity to plant trees in the National Forest. They've now grown, and some of the trees have been thinned, so they're now in established woodlands. And what I live in that area as well, so you really do see the visual impact and the benefit of a scheme of that nature. So a lot of the industrial land or available industrial land has been planted, but the National Forest had to develop a mechanism where they provided the incentive for farmers and landowners to diversify into woodlands and forestry. And they've run a couple of schemes, but the current one is called the Changing Landscape Scheme, which provides a very generous contribution to developing schemes. So Scamhazel Farm, for instance, we're hoping to utilise that funding and actually cover most of our costs in developing the planting. But it does demonstrate that the fact that once those incentives are in place, then there is a huge opportunity to spread that incentive beyond the borders of the forest. Joe may want to comment on the Heritage Lottery Fund bid for the Charnwood Forest Park, because that's an example where the National Forest are expanding in the Charnwood area. But I do feel there's great benefit to expand both the boundary both to the south into the Hinckley-Bosworth area, but also north into beyond into the northern parts of northwest Leicestershire as well.
Very detailed report, and I think it was really good. Like a lot of the members have said, it was really good to read, and thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to update members of this committee on the flooding that occurred in Leicestershire in October and November of 2019. Leicestershire County Council has two separate statutory roles and duties in relation to water and flooding. The first being as lead local flood authority. We talk about the LLFA in the report. This is set out via the Flood and Water Management Act of 2010. The other duty we've got is as the highway, under the Highway Authority, under the Highways Act of 1980. So the background, in October and November, Leicestershire experienced two major flooding events. The first was on the 1st of October, where we experienced a high volume of rainfall in a short duration of time. Areas most affected were Charnwood, Blaby and Melton. The second event ran from the 13th of November through to the 15th of November, where northern and western areas were affected by significant rainfall. Appendix A in your pack details the number of known properties flooded. The table was also broken down by area and the lead responsible risk management authority. We also quote RMA in the pack. So the function of the lead local flood authority in flooding events is to investigate instances of flooding where one or more residential property have been flooded, identify the risk management authority who may have a role in that flooding incident, coordinate and work with those RMAs to identify potential solutions, encourage the responsible RMA to implement that solution. The lead local flood authority does not have a duty to implement a solution to the flooding incident, nor does it have the funding allocated to deliver the flooding related works. It is the responsibility of the independent RMA to undertake the flood related works required. RMA organisations for this area are people like Severn Trent Water, Anglian Water, the Environment Agency, district councils, internal drainage boards, Highways England and the local Highways Authority. Under the Flood and Water Management Act, LLFAs are required to investigate flooding events to the extent that they consider necessary and appropriate. Under the Act, Section 19, investigations may be required. This investigation should identify the RMA responsible for the event and whether they have exercised or will exercise their responsibility in relation to flooding events. Section 19 investigations are then required for the following events: loss of serious life or injury, critical infrastructure flooding or near flooding from unknown or multiple sources, or internal property flooding from unknown or multiple sources. The function of the Highways Authority in flooding events is to manage and maintain the highways drainage system and also to keep the highway safe. During the flooding event, the Highway Authority may close roads that are flooded, put out flood warning boards and distribute sandbags to properties affected by flooding from highways. The County Council does not pump out water or carry out emergency rescues. This sits with the police and fire service. During the two flooding events, the LLFA responded to over 200 flooding inquiries during October and November and attended several engagement meetings as outlined in point 22 of your pack. The highways teams dealt with over 385 flooding sites, closed over 70 roads and dealt with over 300 inquiries from members of the public, as detailed in table number 1 of your pack. So the current position. The LLFA are collating information and have commenced investigations on the causes of the flooding, picking up information from parishes and local communities. They have also been actively engaged with landowners to inform them of their riparian responsibilities for watercourse maintenance. To date, 8 new sites have been identified as requiring full Section 19 investigations following these recent events. At present, it is too early to determine how long the Section 19 investigation will take. This will depend on the complexity, but on average it can take anywhere between 6 to 18 months and can cost anything between £5,000 and £70,000 for the investigation. The LLFA are currently also seeking financial support from the Regional Flood and Coastal Committee via the local levy. This is to help undertake some of these investigations. They are also working on improving the customer information when it comes to flooding with other members of the Resilience Partnership, and have also undertaken an exercise to establish if there is any correlation between new developments and the flooding sites that we have seen here in Leicestershire. The authority has provisionally allocated £550,000 in next year's budget to support the department deal with these investigations and repair some of the highway drainage systems as outlined on point 48. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Have had experience, I have to say, with Appleby Magna and Normanton Lee Heath, dealing with 2 different groups from the county, with Andrew Smallwood from the Flood Authority and Andy Hunt from Highways. Both these have proven, I've met Andrew Smallwood, but not Andy Hunt, but they sound very vigorous and very, very helpful people. Andrew Smallwood attended a meeting of residents who described the flooding of foul sewerage in the homes up to the waist. That was a very difficult meeting, and he was outstandingly good how he's performed. He's also attended a meeting with members of the public and the local authority, the parish council, and once again I can only thank him for his attitude and the way he portrayed and what he was prepared to do and try to do, and he's been extremely helpful to me. As Andy Hunt, I've not met him as yet, but he's been out to see a group of people who've been affected and inspecting highways and doing everything. I can only speak very highly of all their activities. The sad point is, with all this dynamic energy and help, which is greatly valued by somebody who's flooded, and to actually, for somebody who's never been flooded, to actually go and see these people and listen to how the emotion and the stress they have, wow, it's an undertaking. But the problem lies with, I believe, a lot with Severn Trent. Severn Trent have pumping stations, and the one for Appleby Magna is based in Measham, which is just underpowered. It hasn't got the capacity to be able to deal with it. The engineers say, well, it's working full on, but then we've got manhole covers popping up and all sorts. And the problem is that nobody's been managing the pipe infrastructure, because we're getting surface water going through, and because their pumps are not updated, yet they never object to any local planning applications, never a comment, because, you know, they welcome another 1,000 homes. It's another 1,000 bills every month. It's wonderful. But there's got to be some sense of responsibility. Now, I've experienced quite recently where they're putting a 24-inch pipe in for a new development of 30 properties, running into a 9-inch pipe. Now, I'm not an engineer, but I did think that's an incredible feat of somebody's vision, maybe, a vision, not an engineering outcome. But so I can say, Madam Chairman, I've been absolutely delighted with the reaction and the response of the officers of this authority that I've worked with, and it's ongoing, and they're still coming back and meeting people and trying their hardest to resolve, and they've actually got some work done on a brook that it stopped. If they hadn't have done this work and got people involved, and I think they got a district council who'd worked previously, so they went along and said, we can do that. So those people didn't have a flooded home at Christmas. And I think it's just nice because we work with officers, but I think it's nice occasionally when we see outstanding efforts to be able to say, well done. And I hope that comment does go back to them because it's well deserved. Thank you.
Mr. Hunt. Okay.
Janice.
Pardon. I'm gratified that you're putting more money into, I think, despite the council tax that we share as a burden, but I think most people would regard that as an absolute priority. I thought the report was excellent, but also the verbal as well. But I do like a map, and I thought there should have been a map somewhere showing areas of probably. But finally, I know that there's been discussions, certainly amongst these correspondents and officers, about possibly setting up a scrutiny panel so that we can look at the key areas which we could effectively address. Now, the areas we can effectively address, obviously money is a limitation on everything. But perhaps the Scrutiny Commission might look at the lines of inquiry that could be made to put together a report that's going to be helpful to residents and ourselves. So I think that was the last thing I had to say. There's something else in here, but never mind. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Morgan.
Thank you very much, Chair. Really brief comment, which is just to say Bramcote Road, which is an area that has flooded over whenever the significant flood has had issues. I was with residents when the county were there along with EA and the Borough Council, and there may even have been somebody from Severn Trent, but also from the MP's office as well, and also the MP. And it was, I have to say, the response to the flooding was a real team effort from, I think, probably across the board. All authorities, all bodies realised that this was quite a serious event, quite an unusual event, and it was quite impressive to actually see that everyone responded. The second flood, when it hit, again, I think everyone was ready on the basis of having actually learnt quickly any lessons that needed to be learnt from the first time round. And again, plenty of compliments locally, albeit a great deal of distress for those that were actually flooded out. And having been flooded out myself, it is a horrible experience. I have every sympathy with anyone else that goes through it as well. So I know I'm looking forward, as the residents in my area are, to reading the reports when they come out, and hopefully we can swiftly get on with any of the recommendations as and when we've identified them. Thank you.
Briefly, Chair. Yes, Mr. Harris and I have got something in common. We are frustrated when we have to grant a plan application on land with knows floods, yet Severn Trent won't back us up and they say there's no problem, even though we know locally there's a problem. And just recently we had a planning meeting and we said to the land floods, Severn Trent said it didn't, granted plan permission, next day land flooded. But we're only local, we only give our local opinion. If it comes to appeal, Severn Trent send up the appeal and we're not experts, they are, and they win the day. But I think there's something definitely wrong with the system about flooding. We're building on floodplains, we wonder why we've got flooding in other areas. You can't beat water. It will always find its way round. And one application we had, application went through because Severn Trent said if you build a wall, it'll stop the water flooding the area. No, it just goes around the outside or underneath it. I just can't believe some of the things that they come out with sometimes. Anyway, that's my little moan. But I have got a moan in that Newton Lane in Wixton, it goes from Wixton through to Wistow, has never flooded in living memory until the last 6 months. And now it floods. Never have it flooded before. So there must be something changed somewhere that's caused this. Well, it's the farmers not digging the ditch out now or something, but it's never happened before. So if somebody could look at that, because it is a nightmare when that one does flood. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just regarding a sort of three-part question, if that's okay. Regarding the Section 19 investigations, I was just wondering if Cossington, one of my villages, was one of those. It was quite badly affected. There was 10 houses flooded internally in Cossington. Given the size of the village, that's a significant portion of the population. So really just a factual one there. Second one, we had a public meeting in Cossington a few months ago now in November, which was very welcome, very well attended, incredibly well attended, and the officers that attended were very well received. Obviously it's a distressing time, an incredibly distressing time when you're affected by flooding, but I know residents really appreciated the fact that officers were there to listen to them and take on board those concerns. In terms of sort of going forward really from that point, I know some of the responsibility is ours, some is Environment Agency, might be other agencies as well, but from sort of a resident point of view, they don't really understand the difference there and confusion who's responsible for what. Is it part of your role, could it be part of your role to sort of be a conduit through which we can contact, so instead of trying to research who's responsible for what, we could just come to yourselves and maybe get the answers that way, sort of a one-stop shop? Would that be something that you'd be able to do? And third is just about following on really from the last question. That's about mitigation measures at new developments. Now I know as part of the planning process, all new developments have to mitigate the sort of the water impact, the flood impact. But do we check that those actually work? Now there have been significant questions raised in Cossington as to whether it's a coincidence that the village has suffered its worst flooding in living memory at a time when there's been Leicester City are building a major complex upstream, and there's at least one major housing development that's already got planning permission. Now, I tell the residents they will have flood mitigation measures, but if they don't work, then who checks that? And it seems a big coincidence, put it that way. So just those three questions, if possible.
Mr. Clark, do you want to come back? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, just on the three questions. Cossington, yes, it is one of the sites identified by the Section 19, and it is going through a process at the moment. I am also aware of the meetings that have taken place with the local residents, and it is nice to see people coming out and helping us with what we need to do. So it's good. one point of contact is very, very difficult. So on the Section 19 notices, we're in a good place to coordinate responses and make sure everybody is fully understanding of roles, responsibilities and accountabilities. When you're looking at flooding overall, I think it would be a virtually impossible task to keep track of that all the time, as well as make sure that the agencies are doing what they should be doing. And on your last point, there is an exercise, or we have gone into an exercise with regards to trying to understand where the flooding did occur this time in Leicestershire in correlation with regard to new developments. We are not, at this present moment in time, putting any blame in any way, shape or form in any direction. What we just want to do is understand that. It is part of the role of the district council, though, when the developments are being developed, to check the drainage provision that's been done on site, is my understanding.
Planning authority.
Planning authority.
Yeah, if I may, Chairman, I just wanted to conclude myself by thanking the team for bringing a report to this panel. I did actually ask for a report to come because the scale of what we've seen towards the end of last year, I think, justified a public airing of what our role is, and actually a recognition of the scale that we're having to deal with here. I hope we've cleared up some misconceptions about the role of the local lead flood authority. It's a shame that we don't have the powers to compel organisations to act upon any findings. I think it's already been recognised that this could be very resource intensive. It is a priority for the authority to make sure that areas that are prone to flooding are investigated thoroughly. We are doing our job in terms of coordinating any action thereafter, but I once again stress that it's very difficult to compel organisations to act, and it would be nice to see powers forthcoming for us to be able to deal with that. Can I just finally thank Ozzy, because something that hasn't been covered here, it's a large portfolio. As you know, we've already spoken about some of the highway stuff and the environment stuff, and we have obviously the flood or local lead flood authority. But Ozzy sits as my support member on an external body called the Regional Flood and Coastal Committee, and we contribute a sum of money each year, and then we bid in for monies to be able to investigate areas that are prone to flooding to make sure that we're resourcing the infrastructure needed to mitigate that excess. So thank Ozzy for his work in that area. And I think maybe, Chair, it might be useful that at a future occasion you invite Severn Trent to one of the meetings, and maybe we have a format where all of the investigations that Severn Trent are associated with, the members can raise questions and air their concerns with them directly. Right. Thank you, Chairman.
Just one final point. I would really welcome that, but perhaps maybe part of the wider review, we talked about the member review into flooding. That might be very appropriate. One other point, if I may, Chair, just to reassure the members and other parties that submitted papers in relation to flooding in specific instances in their areas, just to reassure them that either we do know about them or working on them, or we will be looking into them in detail, and we will be liaising on with them on that, because I know it hasn't particularly come up in the conversation so far, but just to give that reassurance.
Okay, if there's no more questions. We now go on to item 11, Environmental Performance Report, 2018-19 and Greenhouse Gas Report, 2018-19, pages 109 to 134. And can I ask Joanne Gile to introduce the paper, please? Thank you, Joanne.
Thank you, Chair. I thought I'd go through this line by line. No, I won't at this late hour. I'm going to lose a number of colleagues. I may lose, so I know I'm kind of closing the show with this report, but if you'll bear with me. We've trodden this path before, so I will skim through it quite quickly on the assumption that if you've got any questions specifically that I overlook, that you'll pick them up. But it is a report of two parts, so as the Chair has mentioned, it covers our 18-19 performance, and it provides firstly an update on delivering the targets in in this year's report, it covers the 2 environment strategies. So the one and that's because basically our old environment strategy and the current strategy, it straddles the 18-19 year. I accept that we're also reviewing it again because of the climate emergency commitments, but that is why we cross-reference both strategic documents. And then secondly, progress against the greenhouse gas emissions targets for the County Council, and it covers things like any costs we've incurred in relation to our carbon reduction commitments. So if I just look at the annual environmental performance report first, I'm just going to look at the highlights and any key messages. You've got a summary dashboard at Appendix A on page 123 in your pack. So linked to that, if I just look at pick out some of the measures where we're behind targets, so those red ones. In overview, they're largely the areas where we have limited control. So an example of that where we're behind is CO2 emissions from road transport. So we're 4.8% above the target that we've set, and ultimately, in simple terms, that's linked to higher volumes of traffic on the roads. I'm telling you things we all already know. Equally, household waste recycled and compost and reused, that figure for 18-19 is at just over 45% against a national target of 50%. It's something that this scrutiny committee has interrogated in detail, so I will not go into that here, but if you have questions, I'm happy to take them. And then, arguably, we absolutely should be tackling this more, but it's complex. The third one I would highlight is our biodiversity indicators, and I've discussed this with colleagues of this committee, and we've discussed the value of the indicators that we have are arguably not necessarily the right indicators going forward. So we are looking to identify some more meaningful KPIs, which will go into the new environment strategy, and we will be held to account on some of those as we develop them. In terms of the measures that were ahead of target, CO2 emissions overall, an incredibly good story, 16% reduction since 17-18, so just within 1 year, and 69% reduction since 2008-9 when we started reporting. Renewable energy generation as a percentage of consumption significantly up, now at 16%, and developments like the Quorn solar farm will increase that further if and when they come forward. More generally, environmental risks are down, business mileage claimed is down. These are positives, no environmental prosecutions, and a very low level of environmental complaints. Two things that I'll just mention at this point before I go on to the greenhouse gas report, because I think they're valuable and they're linked to this annual report. We are, as I mentioned earlier, I touched on, we're revising the current environment strategy and its action plan to take account of the climate emergency declaration in May of last year. We're also looking to produce what we're commonly calling a carbon reduction roadmap, is how we will neutralise that carbon up to 2030. And officers will be bringing that report in detail to this committee in March and then the Scrutiny Commission in April. But it will link to how are we starting to address some of these areas. So we'll bring that in detail. And on the latter, on the carbon reduction strategy, that's the area. We've largely completed the review of the strategy, but the new work streams will be in that carbon sector, and what does it actually equate to, what work streams. So we will go through that at the next committee meeting. And the other one is just not to duck the issue of tackling our biodiversity, natural capital, those issues, which we've just had indicators that haven't moved for a number of reasons for a number of years. We are working with a number of partners on developing a strategic approach to that because we can't do it on our own. And again, that will feature in something that I bring back to the next committee. In terms of greenhouse gas report, the second part of your paper from page 119, again, it's just to reiterate to members, we're following that well-trodden path. It's a national template report that we have to publish, and we will publish on our website. And it explains the various scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions and how the calculations are made. And hot off the press, before I just give the highlights, something that certainly the lead member, Blake Payne, and yourselves, I think, have challenged. It's this annual report, we have to cover all of the extremities of it, but it's quite cumbersome. There's a huge number of statistics in it to digest. What we've been trying to work with, and this is just a draft, a demo, so I'm just going to hold it up, is sort of a 4-page at-a-glance summation of this, which is easier to just get a snapshot. And what we're looking at is it will support, we have to produce these reports annually, but we would, alongside publishing the reports, the very wordy documents on the website, we would publish this at a glance so that if you have residents that want to download that, and we're looking to try and have that ready for the 18-19 position, so we'll put that on the website as well when it's ready. So in terms of the highlights, we've seen a further 18% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from 17-18, 64% reduction since 8-9. Again, another really good news story. The biggest decline in that area is coming from street lighting with 32%, and we've discussed that in the past. We do recognise there's more work to do on emissions, so areas like operational fleet and the grey fleet, the number of miles, why are people travelling, are there other ways that we can do that? So those are areas that are going to feature in that carbon reduction roadmap. What are we doing? We've done a green fleet review. We're just starting to digest that, but those things about electrification of some of our fleet and where technology is advancing are going to start to feature in those work streams. What else would I highlight, because I'm conscious of time? The only other thing that's worth mentioning in terms of carbon, I think, is that whilst we've had a huge improvement in the last 5 years, I think our initial assessments of all the other work streams are that there is no single big initiative, a silver bullet that's going to deliver all the other carbon that's left. And certainly in terms of our own measured emissions, which these reports look at, it's likely to be a series of small or medium-sized projects, and the detail, as I said, to the next committee. So if I were just to conclude then, I would suggest that generally the report shows good continued performance, particularly in terms of reducing carbon and wider greenhouse gas emissions. But I acknowledge that there are still some significant areas of work, certainly in the wider Leicestershire context, and we need to be looking at those. And I think this year there'll be a lot of ambition to drive those forward. We will be coming back on the environment strategy. We'll be coming back on carbon across this calendar year. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. Sorry, Max, are we talking, I mean, obviously we had, the only sort of... Yes, so we're following the national stuff that comes out of the Clean Growth Strategy, so the big national targets which are captured in our environment strategy. I've got a draft of it here if you wanted me to sort of pick it up with you afterwards. But yes, all of the big national drivers we've got, though we are reviewing the strategy in light of the challenge, can we go to full carbon neutrality by 2030 for our own emissions. So that is the bit where we are proposing to go 20% further, 20 years faster. But yes, the only traded element, sorry, and I might have misinterpreted, is the stuff around the carbon reduction commitments, which are mentioned in the report.
Sorry. Yeah, as usual, I think this demonstrates the blind spot that the authorities got, in the sense that we can see our own vehicles coming in and out of County Hall, as it were, but we don't see, or we perhaps, as denial is the better word, all the traffic going past us on the A50 and around the county, which is one of the most serious causes of greenhouse gases. And yet, you know, we've been talking about transport for most of the afternoon, and yet this report doesn't touch on that. And I think we have to step up a gear and take that on. I think the same probably occurs with some of our waste policies as well. I'm on the local pension committee for my sins, because most people don't think it's very interesting, but quite often we raise the question of investment of the pensions, and I'm not saying we should, I'm not advocating anything about our pensions investment, but there's a very interesting guy called Bob Litterman who writes copiously about investment. He's a capitalist. He's one of these people like BlackRock, which is the largest pensions investor in the country, responsible for pricing investment. And he tells the story of how him and his wife, American, were driving along on holiday, and a burning truck came towards them. He said it was his wife who noticed it first. He was driving. And fortunately, the car, they managed to stop the car, slow it down, and stopped in time before meeting this burning truck. And he uses that as a metaphor for what we're encountering at the moment. We can see a burning truck way down the road, perhaps not so far down the road, and we're wondering whether to slow down or whether perhaps it'll miss us, whatever. And I thought that was a very interesting, particularly for a Transport Committee, metaphor to think about as we close the meeting shortly. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pity it's so late in the afternoon. I had 11 questions to ask Joanne, but I'll cut it down to 2. It's done on purpose, I'm sure. This yours comes on last. Wildlife sites. How are we doing with that now? Because we seem to be getting year on year, we don't seem to be doing anything about them. So that's one question we need to concentrate on. The other one, I was a bit concerned with the comment on page 113, item 28. And perhaps it's more for Blake to answer rather than an officer, where it says we're not meeting legal requirements. And if we're not, what we're doing about it, when are we going to make legal requirements? Because to me that's a serious statement to make in a public paper, that the county council's not doing what it should be doing. So what we're doing about it.
So I will actually defer to Joe. Just for clarity though, it says these environmental risks relate to areas where the council is not meeting legal requirements, council policy, or is significantly failing to address environment strategy objectives. So
yeah,
there's 3 areas that falls into.
And if we look at page 123, Appendix A, some are highlighted there in red. So I just want to know what we're doing about it. Can I report to the next meeting what we're doing, please?
Sorry, Bill. On the last point, I'll deal with the first 2, and if I can just clarify, or I'll go to the last point. The Appendix A, the reds, I skimmed over them, but in the report I acknowledged that there are a number of reds, and in terms of, I think I mentioned that there is a challenge about our ability, our level of control over that. So one of them does acknowledge Max's earlier point as well about, are we avoiding the fact that the report in itself is deliberately covering our scope emissions, but it isn't. I don't want to underplay the fact that the wider work on what are we doing about having declared a climate emergency and what is Leicestershire's future role on the environment, and Blake may want to come back on that, is something that the authority has tasked officers, all parties, to go away and set out how we might do that. And what that will start to look like is, what will we have more ambition on our own activity where we do have greater spans of control? And then what will our role be in working in partnership with others? Because ultimately carbon, even if we tackle all of our in-scope activities and wider activities which are not currently having to be measured, it's only 1% of the total carbon of Leicestershire. So actually with an airport and other things, what's our role in working in partnership? But as that role gets bigger, our influence and control diminishes. But that isn't to underplay the fact that our strategy will have to address what our approach needs to be. Specifically linking back to the other 2 points, the wildlife sites, we acknowledged at a previous meeting that these indicators, officers have acknowledged our ability to address these indicators is incredibly limited. We wait on an arrears from Natural England on the reporting. We can do something about putting resource in to catch up with the monitoring of those sites. However, we are questioning, I suppose my example would be, we are questioning whether we're trying to fix biodiversity in the right places. So we could spend a substantial amount of resource and effort to address these specific indicators and yet find that they don't link to the wildlife corridors and the migration of diversity across Leicestershire. Would it not be better to acknowledge that we may let some of those sites fail or diminish, but we would replace them with something else. Now that work is being progressed behind the scenes and will be a future report that we bring back, and it is an element in the action plan of the environment strategy, which is a different report for the March meeting, where we will have some things about proposed alternate indicators for biodiversity. So not to simply forego these existing ones, but they are the existing ones for 18-19, but look to replace them with something else. And my only point to add to points earlier on the environmental risks, if I give examples from my service area, risks always get identified by virtue of what happens within your services. They come and they go. The challenge for officers is to address them. So certainly in Pat and my area there are some, but if I go back to the MTFS, a line we didn't really debate, it's arguably small, but some of them are drainage issues at my RHWS. It doesn't preclude people using them and operating them, but it's not good enough. But the time it takes to do the scheme designs and the planning and commission the work, so they are in our MTFS to address them, but we're transparent about the fact they don't fully comply until we get that piece of work done. So there is an acknowledgement that some of it is simply a timing thing, or looking under the ground to look at where something's going wrong, who's the statutory agent that's responsible. They're simply in the work plan, but they'll take a bit of time.
Chair, whether these sort of things, there should be a comment at the side about what it's tying into and what's happening about it, rather than just make the comment with no explanation. That was all. It just...
Yeah, Chair, the comments and the commentary are contained within the report, but the only other thing I'd add to that, just if it didn't come out, is that at the end of 2018-19, there were 12 environmental risks. That's reduced to 6 as of November 2019. So in terms of reducing the amount of, if you like, red risks, or the category of red, notwithstanding the point that Joe's just made, that they ebb and flow throughout the year, is reducing, so that is progress. But I think the other point, just to reiterate, is our level of control on some of these risks. The other point that's been made is some of them might be to do with legal requirements. That's more legal notifications. It doesn't prohibit us from keeping waste and recycling sites open, etc., because of drainage, but we need to demonstrate that we've got a strategy and a plan to deal with those issues moving forward.
If I may, Chair, the only thing that might give some context, hopefully some assurance, it doesn't forego the fact we have to challenge our environmental risks. Since we introduced our environmental management system and actually scrutinised the services and what our risks are, for an organisation of this size, when we started, we had upwards of 300 environmental risks. We're now left with 6. But as services change, we'll take on new functions, we'll forego others. It would just be to give the assurance that when we started to have a formal environmental management system, we had hundreds of risks, and we are now trying to tackle just the few last legacy ones that are outstanding.
Very much, thank you. I think we've covered about everything. So we come to item 12. The next meeting of the committee is scheduled to take place on the 5th of March 2020. I'd just like to thank officers for their detailed reports and members for all of their questions, which have been very relevant. Have a safe journey home, and thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for your help. It went all right, didn't it?